This is Keys to the Shop, episode 342, a conversation with 2022 US Barista champion Morgan Eckroth. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio, and I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. Really quick, if you would subscribe to Keys to the Shop, just hit the button that says subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That would be awesome. You'll always be up to date with new episodes. You'll be notified when they come out, like today's episode with US champion Morgan Eckroth. And yeah, go ahead and do that. Now, also, if you have the time, go ahead and rate and review Keys to the Shop on Apple Podcasts and share these episodes with a friend or your team. That especially, the sharing part, is huge for spreading the word about Keys to the Shop, getting these ideas and topics to more coffee professionals around the globe. Thank you so much for doing that. Now, I want to make you aware that Keys to the Shop also offers consulting and coaching for you and your business. If you're looking for someone to guide you along the process of starting your first coffee business, or you're an existing retailer or operator who needs to level up your operations, your people, and your quality, there's a lot of ways that Keys to the Shop consulting can come alongside you and help you do just that. Whether that's remotely or in person, let's have a conversation. All you need to do is set up a free discovery call with me. Just email chris@keystotheshop.com. We'll get on the phone and talk about what you've got going on and whether working with Keys to the Shop Consulting is the right fit for your situation. Again, that email is chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode is brought to you by the ground control Cyclops brewer from Vogue Coffee, a revolutionary new brewer that is taking the world by storm because the SCA award-winning technology in the ground control allows you to access a huge range of flavors in your coffee and gives you precise control over those flavors like no other machine does. This is a game changer for what you can expect from batch brew coffee. I guarantee you'll be blown away by the drinks you make on this machine. But besides being a batch brewer that just levels up the quality of your batch brew, it also is a tool of versatility. It can make tea, batched iced lattes, batch cold brew. So this brings a lot of great workflow to your bar and a level up in quality. It's great. So check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee. If you're looking for versatility, quality level up, and just an amazing machine to look at brewing coffee, frankly, then you need to consider buying the Ground Control Cyclops brewer for your store. Again, for more information, check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista series, which is the line of plant-based performance beverages designed for and approved by baristas worldwide. And when I'm talking about approved by baristas, not only are these designed for the professional barista world, but professional baristas basically sign off on all of these beverages before they even get sold to you and you get to use them in your store. That's why they perform so well. They stand up to the heat from steaming. They produce an amazing silky texture, great for getting latte art in all your drinks. And they also keep the balance of the beverage focused on the coffee. Go to pacificfoodservice.com to learn more and get these in your store to try it for yourself. If you're looking for the best in plant-based beverages to serve your customers, I really do think it has to be the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, I'm excited to welcome back to the show the newly crowned US Barista champion, Morgan Eckroth. You know Morgan from MorganDrinksCoffee, and we had her on the show previously. I'll link to that in the show notes. You can hear all about her journey into coffee and into building these platforms that she has that are just world famous in the coffee industry and beyond. Morgan is a barista and content creator and has worked in specialty coffee for over 5 years now with over 5 million followers across TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. She shares her love for coffee through comedic customer service sketches, vlogs about her job, and educational videos as well. Morgan has also released a line of coffee in collaboration with Wrecking Ball Coffee in December of 2020 and is working to continue to create a link between baristas and their customers through a shared love of coffee and a little bit of humor as well. And as I said, Morgan has re-entered the space of competition. She had previously competed early in 2020, but this time she has walked away with the championship. She is the new US Barista champion as of just a couple of weeks ago in Boston. And in this conversation, we're going to be talking to her about just the road to this competition, how she decided to start competing, the challenges in constructing the performance along the way. We're going to be talking to Morgan about all the components of her signature beverages and the coffees that she used, the thinking behind it, the message of accessibility that was the thread through her entire competition, and just her idea of what people can do to prepare for competition, to benefit from it, and her own experiences in that journey. There's a lot of things covered here. And of course, Morgan is always a wealth of knowledge and very articulate in the way that she expresses her perspectives. And so I know you're going to get an incredible amount of value from this conversation. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Here now is my interview with the US Barista champion, Morgan Eckroth. Morgan, welcome back to Keys to the Shop. How are you doing?
I'm good. I think I've finally caught up on all my sleep deficit that was happening for the past 2 months. So I feel great today.
Excellent. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. It was a surprise and a shock and exciting and scary all at the same time. So it's thank you a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, it's absolutely just awesome to see how last time we talked, you were amidst the moving process, I believe, and there was some just upturn in life and job, and we had a great conversation, and now it seems like you're in a different world almost.
It feels like that. That's a good way of describing it.
So talk to me about that, because in the midst of all of that upheaval and the moving, et cetera, and of course, pandemic, that should not be unspoken. So what inspired you to get back into competition? Because you had been in competition prior and you've been developing your brand and just working in coffee, but now you decided this is the time to enter back into competition. How did that process start for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I knew competition was something I wanted to do again, kind of personally. The last time I competed, which was back, I believe, in very early 2020. So in those few months before the pandemic really started, I didn't do as well as I wanted to. I left competition, 2 years ago, feeling like I had underperformed against kind of myself. And that was something that was really disappointing and something I wanted to challenge myself again. But with that, when I kind of had this itch again to be like, ooh, I want to do it, I had to really sit down and think about my own new context, because no matter what I did, even if I decided not to talk about competition at all on any of my platforms, it was inherently something I was taking with me as a creator and as all this stuff. So I then kind of had to sit there and go, okay, how do I want to handle this? Is it something I want to address in my routine? Is it something I want to talk about online? Is it, what does this new form of competition look like for me? And I came to the conclusion that I really wanted to chronicle the entire journey of kind of starting preparation for USBC to the end of it. Because back when I was a first-time competitor back in 2019, I had help. I had some coaches and some people I could reach out to. But for the most part, I was kind of like a fish out of water. I was just kind of throwing stuff at the wall, trying to understand the rule booklets. It was very, very overwhelming. And so my goal this year, even more so than just, the actual on-stage competing, was to create kind of a video capsule or series of sorts that could hopefully at least act as context and perhaps even a rough starting point for future competitors who want to jump into it but don't have the immense resources needed to really understand the intricacies of the United States Barista competition. So that was the goal, and that was kind of where I started when I began with my prep this year.
It feels very appropriate. And I would imagine anybody who sets out to do something like that might just drop the ball right at the competition and say like, well, I've chronicled up into this point now. I need to focus. However, you took it all the way on stage, which I thought was really amazing. And that seems to just not distract you. For a lot of us who have been in competition, it's like, I will shut the world out. I will disown my family. And it just means getting a 4 or 5. I don't care. So talk about that. Like we did that aspect of it, which I think again was awesome. How did you manage that in your mind as you were addressing the judges, but also you're addressing the world in a sense?
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely kind of an interesting headspace to be in, because you're right. Kind of throughout the entire, 3 days of competition, I wasn't able to kind of like, my preference kind of as a competitor and as a competitive person, you kind of you lock down everything, you like listen to your music, get in the right headspace. But the entire time of prepping while we were in Boston, I had to kind of be like, okay, how's our tech set up? Like, am I laved up? Like, am I ready to like respond to comments? Like, it was just like, I wasn't able to do what I usually did. And it actually worked out, I think, really well, because I kind of stayed out of my own head and was able to just flow with everything. I think I was a lot less stressed actually this year. But how we actually started with involving so much tech was kind of a complete surprise. So initially when we had been working on my routine, the theme had been the same the entire time. It was like digital accessibility and like, coming through the pandemic and like all this stuff. And we had initially planned on simply like explicitly referencing the usual like official live stream that happens at competition, because that's kind of the status quo, is it's live streamed every year. So we'd planned on just directing my audience to that live stream, and like it was simple. We didn't have to do anything on the tech side. I happened to reach out to competitions. Like I think it was maybe a little bit over a week before we were actually leaving to go to Boston. And I was like, hey, just curious, where we're going to be live streaming, whether that's Facebook or Vimeo or, whatnot. And that is when I found out that there was not going to be a live stream. And so all of a sudden, the entire like core glue that held my routine together just came crashing down. And I remember standing in my kitchen and just like staring at my husband, and I went, life just got harder.
Oh, man.
And so we actually, really thankfully, due to our current like filming setup and both of our experience with like content production and like live streaming, we were able to like whip together like a really makeshift live streaming setup. I had a separate like a wireless lav mic on with me on stage that was directing to our live stream. Graham was all set up with like the right tripod and tracking and all that stuff. And he was operating all of the streams from the audience, which ended up working out great. But then we now had this added challenge of, so there was no, the status quo was not live streaming this year. And as a competitor, I can't like reference the audience necessarily. Like I can't be like, look behind you, my husband's in the audience and he has a camera. Like I couldn't say that. So me and my coach were like, okay, how do we now point to the fact that we are live streaming, going this extra mile and all this stuff. And so that led to us having a secondary live stream going on from the stage. So while I was on stage, we were actually streaming to TikTok for all of the routines. My husband was streaming to YouTube, and then I was doing from TikTok. And it was this really, really cool thing actually, because during all my prep times and those 15 minutes setting up for the routines, I would get the live stream started. And then once I was waiting for the judges, I was just kind of standing there like looking at comments or like waving or like kind of chatting. And it honestly felt like it was like a little extra like support system on stage with me, because I wasn't really alone up there. It was like a bunch of people that I should like say hello to and not ignore. So it worked out really well, but it was definitely a challenge going from that 1 week before competition of being like, we have to purchase so much stuff right now, to like getting there and being like, does the Wi-Fi work? Can we stream? Is like the camera placement right? It was a whole ordeal.
Wow, what a challenge. But obviously you're up for the challenge considering your background.
Absolutely.
And then also as you're talking about how you're commenting to people or waving on TikTok, et cetera, mm-hmm. I again can't fathom it because you're just like trying to not have your hands sweat and you're trying not to get busy from all of your dial-in shots.
Yeah.
And it does seem though that it could help alleviate the pressure, because it would ground you, like pull you out of your own head and get you into this frame of mind. Like, this is bigger than me, which would be the opposite thought that you have, which is, this is all on me if you don't have that distraction.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Kind of like I was on stage there and I could have done, I would finish my practice and I'd be like waiting for the judges to show up. And usually that would be the time, like in past competitions, where I would, like my hands would start shaking or like the nerves would really set in. But this year, honestly, on stage, I didn't feel that like at all. And I don't know if that is, it's probably some component of me just being a little bit more seasoned in my kind of confidence in public speaking and competition. But I do think a component of that was this whole idea in my head that I was like, this is not just me on this stage. This is not about me competing. This is about bringing new eyes to this competition. And we're currently doing that. And that's really cool. So I kind of came to my routine each day with this kind of piece that like, I'm already accomplishing the goal I set out to do, no matter how I do on the score sheets.
So far, we've talked about how the technical aspect of what you're doing is an element of accessibility and what you wanted to accomplish with the competition. And you achieve that through, taking people along the journey. It's this time capsule that people can look at, this template almost that people can say, well, here's Morgan's journey. Let me use that as a starting point. There's a couple questions. First, when you decided to do this, from the time you started practicing and fully committing to the idea to the time you were on stage, how long was that? And then how did you determine the messaging of your actual routine, like the meat of your routine? How did that all come together?
Absolutely. So this season, for context for anyone listening, this season was very strange. It was a very like truncated season, mostly due to the pandemic. There wasn't enough time to do all the different stages of competition that usually happen leading up to the USBC. So that being said, our prep time was very, very limited compared to past years. So I found out I was going to be competing, I believe like pretty much exactly 2 months, almost to the day of then when I was going to be on stage in Boston. So very, very limited time, especially for like the USBC, where generally you will have lots of time to explore different coffees. Some competitors even go to origin. Like you need time to, import stuff. Like there's just all these different components. And we kind of had to throw that all out the window because we're like, we can't do that in 2 months. So I actually, I ended up partnering with Onyx Coffee Lab as my roaster, and then both of my coaches work at Onyx. And so I sat down with my head coach, Lance, just to kind of like iron out what we wanted to do with this routine. And he had a really good idea. He was like, just throw phrases and words and things you want to say onto sticky notes. He's like, just lay them out in front of you. Don't worry about them having any cohesion at all. Just like get the thoughts in your brain out there and then like kind of look at it from an upper level and find that, thread that weaves them all together. So that's what I started out with. And additionally, in the back of my head, I did have this concept of like, ooh, I want to like make a video series about this. And I want to talk about like the digital space and all that. So I remember looking at these pieces of paper in front of me and being like, oh, I'm talking about like a new wave of like hospitality right now. And I'm talking about digital accessibility. And I was like, that's what all these things lead to. So very quickly, I settled on that kind of theme. And then came the matter of scripting, which is like arguably the hardest part of competition. And I think we honestly were revising and working on my script up until like the day we left for Boston. It was an ongoing process that was never really over, and it's still not over. But that being said, the core aspect of my routine was very easily found in that beginning.
Right. So continuity and digital accessibility. And you settled on that in terms of what you wanted to communicate in your script. And then how did that then translate to how you made decisions about your drink sets? Go into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of it was an interesting challenge / limitation this year because we were, I was releasing videos once a week chronicling the different aspects. We did a whole video on what coffees I was using, what like sort of milk I was using and how we were doing that. And then we also made a complete instructional video about my signature drink. And because we were releasing these videos as we were actively preparing, it kind of made us need to be incredibly like calculated and assured about each step of the process. Because once that video was out there, that component of the routine was essentially locked in. Like we couldn't, for sake of continuity and, like trustworthiness, we couldn't really change it after then. So it was an interesting process, and we definitely kind of felt the stress and limitations with it. For example, I had actually in the weeks leading up to Boston, I had a different signature beverage. Like the bones of it were kind of the same, but it was different ingredients, like different flavors, like all this stuff. We actually ended up changing my signature beverage like 2 days before we left for Boston. And so I had to like frantically film and edit this instructional video in like the last 24 hours before we're boarding the plane. And then I'm like on the plane frantically trying to upload it to YouTube. You know, there was like all these additional little like technical challenges that came with it, but it was really exciting. And in some ways there was like a lot of peace of mind of being like, okay, we posted the video. Thank God we can't change it anymore. Like it is what it is.
Oh my gosh. You know, it feels like so much of this peripheral responsibility that you had, I would approach like the competition, like, oh yeah, and then I also have to compete. Let me just get that off the checklist too.
Yeah, it was kind of like honestly like a secondary thought. I was like, oh yeah, I guess I do have to go on stage and say these things as well.
So coffee selection.
Yeah.
And okay, I want your pronunciation of Eugenoides. Is that it?
Yes, yeah. I as far as I know, Eugenoides that's how I've been saying it and haven't been corrected yet. So
okay, it's the new Yogurtchefe.
Yes, basically.
Okay, so talk about that. Is in terms of the challenges, you're talking about technical challenges. You know, using cutting edge or newer types of coffee in competition presents its own types of challenges. When you're making decisions about components of your drinks and sizes of your milk beverages and things like that, how did the coffee and its expression guide you to final decisions about recipes?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was so I used 2 coffees this year, which was it was a new challenge for me. In past years competing, I've only ever used one for all of my courses. So we came into our competition prep with kind of limited selections of coffees just because of, you know, all the time constraints that we had. And I remember Onyx sent me out samples, and the Eugenoides and Sudan Roumet, which was the coffee I used for espresso and signature, was in that collection. And they were very clear that, you know, like, hey, like try these. We think these are some of the best we have right now. They're delicious and wonderful. But if you don't love them, you know, we'll find something else. You know, you need to love the coffees that you're going to be representing on stage. So I was like, great, I'll try these. And it was my first time ever trying Eugenoides. And I remember just kind of like sitting there and having this moment where it felt like I was like a new barista trying like a natural coffee for the first time. You know, when you're like, oh my gosh, this actually tastes like blueberries and I can taste that. And that's so exciting. So I was sitting there being like, oh gosh, this is awesome. I was like, I want to present this on stage. And more so than that, I want to talk about this very exciting coffee with my audience. So we settled on the Eugenoides as our milk course coffee. And then the Sudan Roumet for espresso and sig. The Eugenoides is incredibly unique in its very low acidity. It's not Arabica, it's not Robusta, it's a completely different species. And it acts and tastes pretty different too. I describe it as being like very juice-like. When you pull it as espresso, it tastes like strawberry yogurt, incredibly high like sugar development, which is super cool. And so then when paired with the freeze distilled milk, which is also super like sugar heavy, it just creates this beverage that tastes like melted ice cream. It's so confectionery and just naturally sweet, which was a really, really cool thing to talk about with my audience. And it was really fun to tell people about Eugenoides who didn't know that was a thing that existed. So that was a really cool aspect. And then we had the Sudan Roumet, which is a much more like kind of like a classical like competition coffee. It is kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum. It's much more high in acidity. It is very tropical, very floral, kind of like a punchier coffee. And honestly, it was the type of coffee that I want to drink every day, all day. It's exactly like my sort of thing. So we had that one as well. And that one was kind of interesting because then it's explaining to my audience that we're using 2 coffees. They are on completely opposite sides of the spectrum, but this is why we're using them. And then this is what they taste like. And thankfully, both the Eugenoides and the Sudan Roumet had pretty like approachable flavor calls, I would call. Like the Sudan Roumet was like, it's like grapefruit. And it's like you get some rose in there and you get like some papaya, like very tropical. So it was pretty easy to give people context as to what those coffees taste like. So they could, you know, watch the routine and be like, oh, like I know what the judges are supposedly tasting right now. So that was kind of a lot of the core reasoning once we settled on the 2 coffees.
That's excellent. And you're addressing your audience in this. And it sounds like the reference point you had for some of this is that it's really good for your audience to understand these things, or it translates well to them. And how much of your selection and decision process was based on its relevance or impact on the remote audience versus the judges themselves?
Yeah. So the coffee selection, we kind of had to we started with selecting coffees that were going to perform very well on stage. Like it's kind of the classic like competition coffee. It's a lot of like experimental processes and varietals you don't see. Like it's all of that. And so that was kind of a tricky thing to come to grips with, just kind of for me personally, because it's kind of like an oxymoron to talk about like accessibility and then to be using coffees that are wholly inaccessible by like your average consumer. So I remedied that as best as possible by being as detailed and kind of, I'm trying to think of it as like conversational about these coffees as much as possible. So even though people couldn't taste them exactly, they would at least understand them. But what was cool is actually when we came to the development for our signature beverage, I knew I wanted to be able to release that recipe to audiences at home. And I knew I wanted it to be a recipe that you could make at home, even if it involved a couple steps. So we were pretty intentional with keeping the signature beverage pretty pared down. It was a shaken chilled drink. It was espresso, mango puree, lime oleosaccharum, which is just like a citrus sugar syrup, and then orange blossom water pretty much with like egg white and a little bit of saline solution. So pretty simple as far as signature beverages go. But we then kind of also had the challenge of like, okay, we are making this signature beverage to pair specifically with the Sudan Rumé. It needs to be transformative when paired with the coffee, like all these things and boxes you need to check with competition. And then we were like, okay, but how do we instruct people to make it at home with not the Sudan Rumé? So we did some research. We actually pulled a couple different like coffee profiles and origins that would, for the most part, demonstrate pretty similar profiles to the Sudan Rumé. So when we made the final video, we were like, hey, unfortunately, you won't have the exact same coffee I'm using, but hey, if you get like a lighter, like a washed Ethiopian coffee or like a washed Kenyan coffee, those coffees will express pretty similar characteristics. And in that way, you'll be having the most like replicable experience as possible at home. So that was kind of how we bridged that gap between like competition coffee and then making it at home.
I love that so much. I was really hoping you'd say that.
Yeah, no, we like sat there and we were like, okay, how do we make this drink? Like, it's so silly because you have to, on stage, you have to explicitly reference why the drink that you are serving the judges only works and is only possible with the coffee you're serving them. And then we're over here on the other side being like, but you can make it at home with anything. Yeah. So we had to kind of find the tie between those two.
That's interesting that it explicitly stated that you have to reference that this is only possible with this coffee, which is, I don't know. When I hear that, I feel like that seems slightly silly.
It's one of those, it is... I think all barista competitions are pretty silly. So it's kind of par for the course. But I believe, I'm not sure if the phrasing is still the same on the score sheets. I'd have to go check. Sure. But for a while it was, I believe the word was synergy. Like they are looking for synergy between the drink construction and ingredients and the coffee you're preparing with. So we're like, okay, we have to create synergy and also replicability, but then make sure the judges know that we know that there's supposed to be synergy. So it was like this back and forth, like it was like a mind game we had to play with them. It was like psychological warfare of like telling them that it was specific to the coffee, but also people were making it at home with other coffees.
Right. Fingers crossed behind the back. Just yes. Judge this round and then we'll talk to you later.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Talking in terms of silliness and competitions and the things we do in our industry to entertain ourselves and get better and all that stuff. I want to dig into that a little bit and talk about, the correlation between your personal progress in competition. You mentioned that you felt like you'd left some things out of your last time. Like in 2020, you said you disappointed yourself. You wanted to remedy some of that in this competition. I imagine that you did, and judging by the outcome. But I ultimately want to know the correlation between getting better in competition, at least in your experience, and your own professional growth in regular work situations in the cafe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of tricky. I've always encouraged anyone who wants to compete or even thinks they might want to compete in, whether it's brewers or roasters or barista or whatever. I've always said, do it. I think it is a fantastic experience and I think you will come out of it a better coffee professional. But that being said, it's kind of a tricky line because I don't think everyone needs to or even should, because that being said, this competition is very inaccessible in a lot of ways, both from like a monetary aspect and also just kind of like it's hard. It takes time and investment that not everyone has. And that is kind of one of the downsides of this competition that I think is getting better as more resources crop up, but still it's very, very real. But that being said, competition was something that I always wanted to do. And I have been lucky enough to have been supported by the companies I've worked for when I've stated that I wanted to. But the first time I competed, I was very fresh. I think I'd worked in coffee for like 2 years. I think I was like 19 the first time I competed. So I was super young and I just wanted to engage with the coffee community as a larger whole. And additionally, I wanted to be a better barista. So I came out of my first season competing with kind of like a new passion for coffee. I also came out of it with a lot of really improved technical skills, just, on bar. I also came off with a lot of just more knowledge about coffee in general. And that's something I've experienced each time I've competed. Like, I think I have become a better coffee professional every time I've left the stage, which is very, very cool. And a lot of that is just the amount of research and time that you have to invest in competition prior to going on stage. But I guess that's kind of like the main thing is like I come out of competition each year feeling like I am a better employee and a better person as a coffee professional, which is something that's really valuable to me. And there are absolutely ways I could have achieved that without competition for sure. But for me, being a pretty competitive person and feeling a lot of fire about competition, it was the best way for me to kind of continue progressing and pushing myself.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I agree. There's so much you can learn in this pressure cooker. You don't normally give yourself permission to pursue those things if it's just the ordinary day in, day out life. But in the midst of this, you've committed, and there's a lot of community motivation as well, because there's prestige involved in it. And as you talk about that, though, in referencing the idea of how you had to translate your signature beverage into a more accessible version for people at home, I'm curious about this idea of, maybe you could achieve the same kind of professional development within a normal structure of work in a coffee shop. And if competition itself is like the eugenoides of professional development, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
An inaccessible form of expression that a lot of people aspire to, but may be frustrated that they can't access. What would you like to see in terms, like, if somebody said, I want to, but I can't, but I want to progress professionally, what kind of things could somebody do to either mimic or just get similar results without even having to compete?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my wish is to always see like stronger education programs within cafes. And the thing is, these sort of programs take a lot of time and investment and all sorts of stuff. But that being said, I think there is so much to gain by creating kind of replicable scenarios of like, here's, the goal at the end of like a month is, as a shop, we're going to have like presentations where you have done so-and-so or created so-and-so and kind of set up those goals for your baristas to aspire towards. I think the environment of friendly competition is a really strong motivator for a lot of people. And I think it's super, super powerful. And it would be really cool to be able to see more cafes kind of take that on at a kind of smaller level, just to promote that continual drive for learning and new things rather than settling into the routine of like, this is how we prepare a coffee. This is how we've always done it. This is how we're going to continue to do it. We just pull shots and we throw the drinks out and we're good to go. I think there's so much to be gained from continually promoting like a sense of we want to continue learning. Like, we have not reached our kind of final stage yet. Like, there is so much left out there. And the thing is, like, a lot of baristas just don't know about that. I mean, I didn't know about competition until I was lucky enough to have like a boss who had done it like years ago. And he mentioned it. And that was my first exposure to it. Like, I don't know if I would have stumbled upon it organically. So having trainers or anyone who's just willing to put in the time and energy to find people with passion who want to harness it, I think can create a very replicable experience to actually doing the competition.
Yeah, well said. And that's absolutely, incentivizing people on top of that and planning into the process a reward. I mean, You've got a title and it's prestige and, that goes a long way within a coffee shop. You might not have, you could come up with titles and awards and things like that. But it's a good challenge to see what we can do within the walls of the coffee shop itself, which
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people look to competitions as sort of a outside of their cafe way of proving themselves, because inside the cafe, there's no way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you had a lot of experience as a barista prior to competition. I mean, 2 years of experience before entering into competition. And I'm curious, you mentioned like some people shouldn't compete, or it's not for everybody necessarily. But I want to ask if there's sort of like a prerequisite mindset and or skill set or experience set that it would behoove somebody to have at least. So just like when you're teaching latte art, somebody says, I'd love to pour swans like right now. And
you're like, wait, hang on.
So that I think is the question, like, what would you say are some of those prerequisites or helpful things that might come before pursuit of competition?
I think motivators for competition are very individual, but at least for me, and at least what I've seen personally kind of across the stage, I think prior to competing, you need to ask yourself why you're competing and have that answer kind of in the back of your head for everything you do. And there's lots of, correct answers. I mean, for me personally, some of the reasons I wanted to compete were I wanted to be a better barista. I wanted to, especially this year, I wanted to add value to this competition in any possible way I could. And those were some of my core reasons that really drove me throughout competition. I think having that even more so than any hard skills is super important, because I mean, the power of being passionate about something will take you so far, and it can overcome a lot of maybe like shortcomings you have in your like technical aspects. But besides that, I think some of the things that people should have coming into competition, or if they want to, is a clear idea of the amount of time it'll take. I think if you are looking to do well, you need to be willing to make sacrifices to do well, be that your time, be that any sort of like monetary investment. Competition comes with a lot of strings that you have to be kind of aware of. And I think the people who do best in competition are aware of the level of work it's going to take and are willing to put that in. It doesn't really matter where you start. I think in 2 months, anyone can get from a barista level to like a competitor level, like absolutely. But it really does take time and a lot of effort. It's not just going to come naturally. I'm sure it does for some competitors, but I think that's very rare.
Right. And I guess you wouldn't want to wait too long, because then you might just lose that passion. And I'm curious about that idea of passion. And I've heard it over some episodes here that passion will overcome a multitude of sins or technical, shortcomings. Why is that, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing that passion does is it drives us through these things that would otherwise potentially be like stoppers for, careers. Like in the coffee industry, there are many problems, and there will continue to be problems that crop up, all sorts of things from equity to wage inequality to all sorts of things. Like the list could go on and on. But you have people in the industry who love the other people in the industry, and they love coffee and the community that it provides, and they want it to be better. And I think that's kind of the core of passion, is we want to see the coffee industry be better. And so we're all willing to kind of stick it out and continue pushing forward, like through these problems in order to solve them. And I think that is an incredibly powerful thing, because all the hard skills of coffee, like the knowledge, the flat tamping, like all the things that we look for on the competition stage, can be learned. Like those things can be taught. They can be, all these things. I don't think you can really learn passion. I don't think you can learn that drive to want something to be better. So I think you come into the coffee industry and competition with this drive of wanting us to continue moving forward. And that really is what's going to carry you. The rest of it will just be learned over time.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, in those things, the technical skills and everything are tools in service of that larger goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me this as we wrap up here. I'd love to know about your plans for now. You're the U.S. champion.
It's crazy. I don't know how that happened.
Exactly. I mean, you already have a platform, and now you've got another platform. And I'm curious about what your goals are for using that platform to continue to talk about accessibility, or what other things are coming down the pike in terms of now using this title, and then what you're doing practically speaking to get ready for Worlds.
Oh gosh, that is the scary thing. We walked off the stage, Lance and I, after the like announcements and everything, and we kind of got to the backstage, and usually post competition there's kind of this letdown of like, I did it. I am done. We can go about our lives. We both just stood there for a second and we went, it starts again, like right now, yes. Which is incredibly exciting. I am very, very excited for Worlds. I am intimidated by it. I'll tell you that much. I think the world stage is going to kind of be a completely different ball game than what I'm used to, because I'm pretty familiar with the US circuit, but it gets a lot bigger now. So I'm really excited for the amount of work that's going to go into it. I kind of masochistically love these sort of challenges, and I enjoy biting off more than I can chew. So I think this is definitely going to be that. But the next 4 months honestly look like a lot of, personal training and growth preparing for Worlds. The bones of my routine are probably going to stay the same. Like, I think the message is going to be there. There's not going to be much that changes there, but we now have 4 months rather than 2 to really refine down what coffees we're using, what our drinks look like, our verbiage, a lot of the hard skills and technical things that I kind of missed this round. So it's going to be a lot of just like honing everything to a sharp point now. But along with that, I continue plugging along with what I'm currently doing. So some people were asking, oh, is this like the end of videos and like all this stuff? And I was like, oh, no. I was like, I will still be pouring lattes into like bananas on TikTok. Like, that is definitely still going to happen. And I will still be making like very silly, like Will It Coffee YouTube videos. But that being said, it's kind of, for the last like week and a half since getting back, it has been a lot of thought of what comes next. And I don't necessarily have an answer for that right now. My overarching goal for the last like 2 or 3 years of being like a creator has been to add value to the coffee industry in any way I can, because it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. And if my like little drop in the pond can improve it in any way, I would like to continue doing that. So MorganDrinksCoffee will continue on. I will definitely be cataloging a lot of my world preparation. So that's going to be super exciting. And then we just kind of figured out from there. I think post Worlds is going to be when there are probably going to be some pretty major like kind of life shifts. I don't know what those look like yet, but that's just kind of what I'm anticipating based on how the USBC was for me. But I've also just been kind of telling people, like, I never expected to be where I am today, even like 2 years ago. My coffee career has continued to evolve in like strange and exciting ways. And I'm anticipating it will continue to do so. So I'm excited to see where it takes me rather than me taking it somewhere.
Excellent. Well, it's been exciting to see all of the progress, and it's exciting to see that you've won this competition and all the things that you're going to do in the future. I mean, obviously you've done so much to promote the industry, and the accessibility obviously is a huge thing that we're all talking about, but I think you're uniquely positioned to help push forward also. So it's been wonderful to talk to you, Morgan. Where can we learn more, stay up to date, and follow along as you get ready for the Worlds?
Absolutely. You can find me at MorganDrinksCoffee on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. I'm very chronically online on all of those platforms. Or otherwise, I am on Twitter at 2partscoffee_, which I am slightly less online at, but you can follow along there as well.
Excellent. Morgan, always a pleasure to talk to you. Congrats again. And best of luck at the Worlds.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that you all really enjoyed that conversation. I absolutely love the idea of the accessibility that was the through line for everything in this competition that Morgan put together. Obviously, from how she handles herself and her platforms, it's just a theme with what she wants to accomplish in the industry. And I appreciate especially that move that they made to show people how they could make these signature beverages with other coffees, and the encouragement that Morgan gives to coffee shop operators to create different kinds of training programs in the coffee bar, I think really needs to be focused on. Really dwell on that and think, what can I do to help create opportunities for my staff to better themselves, similar to how people seek to better themselves through competition. I'm really happy for Morgan and all that she's accomplished. What a great ambassador for the coffee industry, both before this competition and especially now as the U.S. champion. So thank you very much to Morgan Eckroth for being our guest again on the show. You can check out her website over at MorganDrinksCoffee.com and follow along on TikTok and other social media channels at MorganDrinksCoffee on every station or every channel there is. So go ahead and do that. You will not be sorry. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, go ahead and give me a shout over on email. Chris@keystotheshop.com is where you can reach me. And that's also the email you can use to reach me for questions about Keys to the Shop consulting. That's Chris@keystotheshop.com. And now coming up here very shortly is the next Coffee Fest trade show that's going to be in Chicago. And then after that, it will be in Los Angeles and then in Seattle. This is, I think, one of the world's best trade shows for coffee retailers. Just hands down, I think it's so valuable because it has free and accessibly priced lectures, workshops, seminars that equip you to be a better operator, to be a better employee, to be a better team leader, just to thrive as a coffee retailer. There's also the trade show floor, putting you in contact with amazing vendors for your coffee shop. There's the community that you get to be a part of while you're there at the show. Competitions like cold brew competition, latte art. There's so much to love about this, and I really hope that I get to see you at one of these shows this year in 2022. Check them out over at coffeefest.com and use the code KEYS to get 50% off your registration when you go to coffeefest.com to register. Again, that's the code KEYS when you're getting your badge or when you're signing up to attend Coffee Fest. You get 50% off your registration. So again, I hope to see you there. Great show, great thing to be involved with if you're looking to energize your staff and equip yourself for success. coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of our show today. Huge thank you again to Morgan Eckroth for being our guest. Big congratulations. Best of luck to you in the Worlds. Thank you, everyone, for joining me on the show. Have an amazing day. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.